Welcome to Pedagogy NEXT, a podcast about excellence in teaching and higher education. The podcast series showcases and celebrates teaching stories and insights from both award-winning faculty members and university administrators who directly or indirectly support teaching. Hosted by the UT Arlington Academy of Distinguished Teachers in partnership with OIT and the Center for Distance Education, we feature a storytelling focus on highlighting diverse voices of educators and others who can support learning excellence in higher education and UT Arlington. For our podcast today, we are talking to Dr. Ramon López. Dr. López is currently a professor in the Department of Physics at the University of Texas at Arlington, where he leads a research group that works in both space physics and science education. He is also a co-director for the UTeach Arlington Teacher Preparation Program. His current research focuses on solar wind-magnetosphere coupling magnetic storms and the application of research-based pedagogy to upper division and graduate physics courses. He is on the UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers and has the UTA Distinguished Record of Research Award. Hi everyone, welcome to Pedagogy NEXT, our new podcast series from the Academy of Distinguished Teachers. We're sharing ideas and stories about innovation and teaching, and we're talking with Dr. Ramon López, Distinguished Professor of Physics. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did, Peggy.
Okay, good. I've known you for a little while.
Right.
We've been around, and so tell us about your background teaching at UTA.
Well, I am a professor of physics, and basically I teach physics courses. But I'm also one of the co-directors of UTeach. So I've been heavily involved with UTeach since we launched it, because that was actually one of the reasons that I was recruited to come to UTA, is to do that. And so I've taught in the UTeach program, but primarily in the physics program. But within physics, my research is primarily space plasma physics, solar wind magnetosphere interactions, but also a significant amount of physics education research, because I do that as a scholarly thing. I publish papers, have graduate students, graduate PhDs in the area, write proposals, etc. And actually, that wasn't something that the physics department did, and I'm still the only one who does it, but I've graduated now, let me see, 4 PhDs in physics education research, and I've got 2 more graduate students in the PhD program, both of whom should graduate in the next 2 to 3 years. So the teaching that I do is very much informed by research. So teaching as scholarship and as research is somewhat different than teaching as an art. I mean, I know many excellent teachers who, their approach is more as an art. They have got a deep understanding of student learning on that experiential level. But the work that I do goes, in the direction of actual research, basing what I do in the class on studies in physics education. Physics education at the undergraduate level, I would say, is by far the most advanced area of what is referred to as discipline-based education research, because different disciplines have different problems. There are certain things that are common across disciplines that are based in cognitive science, such as the nature of expertise. How is expertise developed? What are the differences between experts and novices? But how that plays out in a particular context depends often critically on the subject matter. And so physics has its own specific literature, and I base a lot of what I do on that literature, and then I also add to that literature. So that's sort of my basic view of teaching, because what I'm really trying to do is take the best of what we know from research to produce an environment for students where they really learn. And by learning, I mean that they're acquiring knowledge that's generative, that they can take that and apply it to new situations, new contexts, new circumstances. Because if you can't do that, if you can only parrot back things, and if you can only solve a problem that you had already seen solved before, you can ask, did you really learn a whole lot out of that experience?
Yeah, and I just want to comment, I'm a big fan of UTeach, and I think it's great you're impacting at the PhD level and then their future college students, but you're also impacting K-12 because UTeach is targeted towards preparing K-12 teachers, is that right?
Yes.
In science and math, and that fills a big need.
Right, and I still have a fairly significant footprint in K-12 education. I did a lot of that stuff years ago, and I shifted more to focus on undergraduate education and graduate education when I came to UTA, with the exception of UTeach, right? But other things, so for example, the Next Generation Science Standards, I was part of the leadership committee that directed the writing of the NGSS. So that was a pretty big job, and that has impacted science education, K-12 around the country. Right now, Dr. Karen Jo Matzler, who's one of our UTeach master teachers, she and I have a project that she's the PI on, funded by the National Science Foundation, to provide professional development to teachers around quantum information science. In fact, last week we had a workshop with our teacher cadre for this summer. And as part of that, we're also conducting a study of a new model of professional development where we have the teachers work with us in a master teacher group for a week, and then the following week they do a summer camp with high school students. It's not their students, they don't have a principal looking over their shoulders, and our operating hypothesis is that by having a chance to try out these novel activities with actual high school students, they'll be more likely to actually implement when they go back into their classroom. And we're collecting data on that now to determine if that in fact is happening.
Because that's a tough topic for teachers?
It's a very tough topic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of the stuff in the quantum world is highly non-intuitive and at odds with what we experience in our material world. I mean, I see this with undergraduates all the time. Boy, modern physics is one of my favorite courses to teach because it covers a lot of these topics. And I tell the students at the beginning, prepare to really have your worldview shaken.
Yeah. Because
you're going to learn about how the universe works on the smallest levels and on the largest levels. That's really at odds with your experience in the material world.
So interesting. My twin was a physics major. I studied philosophy, so we like abstract kind of cosmic things. But yeah, thank you so much. And then anything else you want to add on your worldview of teaching? You kind of touched on it.
Well, yeah, students come first. I mean, I tell the students, look, I basically work for you, so I depend upon you to tell me what's working, what's not working. And so a lot of embedded assessment, so peer instruction questions, things like that. Every class, students have to turn in a question, which then forms the basis of the beginning of the next class. I mean, I have my syllabus and my agenda, but if there's a particular concept that students found difficult, and I see that in their questions, well, we have to go back and review that and resolve those difficulties, because you can't just move forward if there's something that they need later that they don't have a firm grasp of.
Yeah, that makes sense. Building those foundations. Kind of shifting gears, what is an idea or mentor who changed your way of teaching?
Well, several different people at various times impacted me. A lot of the way that I work with my graduate students is, partly based on my personality, but also partly based on my dissertation advisor, John Freeman, at Rice University. John passed away a few years back, but just the way he was, very open, friendly, and giving me the space that I needed. That is sort of the way that I work with my graduate students, and try to, graduate students should have a large amount of responsibility for their own learning. They have to be self-motivated. they have to have the fire in the belly to be able to do things. I mean, they need guidance as well, but they also need the space in which to do their own thing.
That's great. So we were talking before this started recording about your teaching ideas with AI, but I'd love to hear about that. But what are some of your best teaching ideas?
Well, everything that is a good idea is basically something I've stolen from somebody else. You know, from the literature and the whole peer instruction thing, and the work that Eric Mazur has done. I've known Eric, I don't know, almost 30 years.
Is he physics too?
Yeah, he's a physicist at Harvard, right? And I got to meet a lot of people in the physics education research community when I was director of education for the American Physical Society, which I did for 5 years in the 90s. And so there's so many good ideas out there, so many things that have been validated through research, the active learning classroom, things like peer instruction, all the work that Lillian McDermott and her group did. When you talk about somebody who had a big impact on me, Lillian had a huge impact on me, the kind of work that she was doing. She and I became very close friends, and I visited her group on several occasions. And sure, I'll just borrow and steal from anybody who's got ideas that they've tried out in the classroom and have proved to be successful where there's evidence for that. So, you know, a lot of these ideas really revolve around an active learning classroom. Students are engaged in the learning. Students are communicating with other students. It's a social enterprise. And in that way, building their understanding.
Okay, great. And then what about AI? Like, tell me more.
Okay, so
big topic of now.
I had been doing this experiment with one graduate student who just graduated with his PhD, where turning lemons into lemonade, right? When we all had to switch to online learning and keep online for a while in the pandemic days, I was going to teach modern physics, which I had not yet flipped. You talk about good ideas. I mean, I stole the flipped idea, which, you know, is an interesting way to do it, although I modified it because we did research on how graduate students and upper division students reacted to a fully flipped classroom. They basically don't like it that much. They prefer more lecture content because that's what they were good at to get to the point to be upper division or a graduate student. So modifying the whole flipped environment proved to be very effective. So I was restructuring my modern physics course to do this, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I could turn this into a research opportunity because we will go back to teaching live. And so we did, and I requested that course, and I had this student who wanted to do physics education. So that's what we did. We compared student performance in the live synchronous and the virtual synchronous courses. And the virtual synchronous actually had a slight edge because I think that students were more inclined to use the online resources when the course was fully virtual. And so we had higher homework completion rates, and the homework was online for all the courses, and higher video completion rates of the online lectures for the virtual version of the course. We needed one more semester. So I'd have 2 semesters of virtual online and 2 semesters of live, or virtual synchronous and 2 semesters of live synchronous. And so I had to get permission from distance learning to do that, and I guess the provost had to approve as well. And at the end of the conversation, everything was approved. They said, well, would you consider doing this asynchronously? And I said, I don't know that this can work asynchronously because an essential part of the pedagogy is student interaction. Students need to dialogue with other people to engage in that metacognition in the problem solving, which normally would be done in small groups in the classroom. If it was live, I would be wandering around the room. If it was virtual, they would be in breakout rooms and teams, and I would just pop in, and I can see all the chats. And many of the students were communicating primarily by chat in the small groups. So how could we make that work in a fully asynchronous environment? Then I went to a conference called EduLearn, which is education and technology, and everybody was talking about, this was last summer, everybody was talking about AI and chatbots, intelligent agents, and there were other things that I learned about, like spaced repetition, and I realized I can combine these various pieces and maybe put together an asynchronous course so that the interactive part, the students will not be dialoguing with students, but they'll be dialoguing with AI. So 2 chatbots, both of which are trained in modern physics content, one of which is also exposed to common misconceptions that students have. We have some from research and other things that are not strictly research-based, but I've taught the course many times, so I know that students have problems with, for example, mass difference in nuclei and things like that. So, and then with chemical bonding, there's a lot of research about student misconception, thinking that bonds store energy when they don't. It's exactly the opposite. Bonds release energy when they form. So how do we get students to realize this themselves? So one chatbot gets everything correct. The other chatbot gets a lot of stuff that's correct, but has these misconceptions included. So when they go in and chat with chatbots to do their homework, then if they agree with the misconception, they might choose that particular distractor that will be in the questions.
Is there a name for the chatbot that you used, or the tool, or did you create it?
Well, my graduate student just emailed me saying I've got an alpha version up and running. So I don't remember exactly what he has done, but I said to him, I don't know how to do this, you go figure it out.
Oh, I love it. Support.
So, you're a graduate student, you're supposed to be a smart guy, you can go and figure this stuff out. And then you come back and tell me, but here's the general thing that we want to go for. And he did.
Oh, good. So
physics students can go figure things out. So students then, when they are in the homework, will get 2 chances to do the homework, and the highest of the 2 scores will be saved. That way, if they agree with the misconception and then realize when they see the score, that's not right, they can go back and change it. All of the literature on conceptual change indicates that for real change in the underlying schema of the learner, the original ideas have to be explicit. And so, for example, when you do peer instruction in the classroom, I tell the students, you have to commit to your answer and write it down, and then dialogue with your neighbors, and then we're going to vote, and then we will sort of come to consensus on what's the correct answer. But you have to explicitly commit to the prior knowledge before you can change the underlying schema.
So true.
And this way, that will provide that opportunity. We'll see if it works. I mean, we're going to be, of course, it's a research project as well as instruction, so we'll be collecting data and doing interviews with students, and we'll see how well this works. And the proof of the pudding will be when we compare the outcomes of that to the prior semesters where we've got data. So that's part of it. Another way that we're using AI is we're using ChatGPT to generate homework questions and review questions for the exam. Now, ChatGPT hallucinates like crazy and gives you a lot of garbage, but it gives you a starting point. So we've got learning objectives, we put them in as prompts, and we get stuff out. Then we look at those questions and see which ones we want to keep, which ones we want to modify. We want to have distractors in there that relate to the known misconceptions when there is a known misconception in a topic, so that will help on the other side of things. But the thing is that every book, the problems in the back of the book, all the solutions are on the web. You just can't get away from that. So one thing that the students, my graduate students, are doing this summer is we're taking the 200 questions that we generated that we used last spring, and they're Googling them and putting them back into ChatGPT to see can you use these tools to get the answers? The answer is no.
Interesting.
Because ChatGPT doesn't know anything.
Right.
It is completely agnostic as far as knowledge. It can only generate You know, these large language
Yeah.
models, they only generate stuff in response. You know, they're not really thinking. So, as I say to people, don't be afraid of the chatbot that passes the Turing test.
Yeah.
Be afraid of the chatbot that deliberately fails the Turing test.
I love it.
Something that shows
Yeah.
intentionality, because there is
Okay.
no intentionality.
Yeah.
And that by itself, that result by itself could be broadly useful in the physics education community, because now you can use these tools, generate stuff that you can easily edit to have good questions, and not be afraid that students can Google those questions and get the answers.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, good. That's really good investigation.
So yeah, we're working on that, and I've got 2 graduate students working on this, the asynchronous version of the course, these additional tools, and yeah, we'll have various papers that
That's
come
great.
out of that.
Okay, we'll look for those. So my next question is, I know you've been teaching a while, but in that time, can you describe a time when you have felt inspired? Maybe one instance especially.
Oh, it's hard to pick
hard,
a
yeah.
particular instance, because anytime you see a student sort of make the connection, that's kind of inspiring, right? And then at the end of the semester, you get notes from students saying, you know, this was a really good course, and et cetera, et cetera. So all of that, I mean, anytime that you can interact with a student and you can see that that student is really gaining knowledge and moving along, that by itself is inspiring. So
That's true.
it's difficult for me to point to
in general,
a
I think
single
it is
single
hard.
thing.
It is hard. I like staying in touch with students. You know, I'm all over social media.
Yes, I know.
And I stay in touch with some of my students that way that reach out to me, and I love seeing their long-term trajectories. To me, that's I love seeing that, what happens when they become, you know, what they want to become and that kind of thing. So, okay, good. And then at the deepest level, like, what does teaching do for you?
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's intellectually satisfying because I've linked it with research and investigation. I'm fundamentally a scientist. You know, I think like a physicist.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
And
yeah.
and so I'm always observing and questioning, and so being able to do what I do in space science, also in the teaching side of things, it's just fun. So I enjoy it a lot, and you know, I think that the students have profited from it, and that is always a good feeling. And certainly my graduate students who've gone on to do other things, and they do other you know other things, right? That's the thing about a PhD in physics, is many students go off and do completely different things. Like I had one of my graduate students in physics education. We were investigating empirical linear and nonlinear models of student performance. How well could we predict student performance from prior data? Things like previous GPA, SAT math scores, etc. Right? And you can get prediction, but not good enough that it's actionable, in the sense that, I mean, we calculated various metrics that are used in space weather prediction,
Oh, wow.
actually. Things like false alarm rate, probability detection, things like that. And what we found is that, well, no, the variation is so great that you can't use it for predicting student failure, because that was the idea. If we can reliably predict student failure, could you intervene before the student fails? So it didn't work out, but we got some interesting results. So he got really interested in the numerical modeling side of things, and went off into data science, and now he's the chief data scientist for a financial services company in Tampa, Florida.
Oh, wow.
So he went off in a very different direction.
Yeah.
But people can do that. And yeah, he's doing very well. He's got 2 children, and he's very happy. And
I love following their careers.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, good. And then what would you say to our audience about what you do in terms of pushing pedagogy forward? So I know you're cutting edge and that kind of thing. Anything else you want to add about innovating or pushing?
Well, in any area there's going to be some discipline-based education research. And not everybody has got to become an education researcher, but if you are a university professor and scholarship is part of your duty, then maybe you should invest a little bit of that scholarship time in looking at discipline-based education research in your area. Not that you're necessarily going to do that and work in that area, publish papers, which is what I do, but you can draw on that knowledge. You can look and see what people have shown to be effective and incorporate those strategies, those pedagogical techniques into your own teaching. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to do things that are different. Mm-hmm. People get very comfortable in their ways, and so mixing it up is sometimes a difficult thing to do, but you can take small steps.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Right? You know, I've had various faculty in my department come and talk to me about, well, I hear you do these things. What is it that you do?
Yeah, yeah.
Why, you know, I had
one,
one faculty write me an email saying, I was just talking with my graduate student, and he says your course is completely different from every graduate course he's ever had. Mm-hmm. What are you doing that's
Yeah, they
different?
want to know. Yeah.
Right, and so I said, well, you don't have to do all these things, because I had flipped the course. Mm-hmm. But what you could do is start to incorporate some in-class problem solving, break the students into small groups, give them a mini lecture that points them in the right direction, and let them work for 15, 20 minutes, get their ideas out, and then proceed with the rest of your lecture. Make it more interactive and include some in-class problem solving. Or a colleague who was teaching an intro course, I said, well, you know, instead of just lecturing the whole time, you could give these concept questions, and here's a book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Pure Instruction by Eric Mazur.
Yeah.
The questions are ready made, and just, you know, one or two questions every lecture, that will just, it'll break it up. Students will be more engaged, and then actually his evaluations went up.
Oh, good. That's mentoring. I think that's informal mentoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've done that with faculty in my department, and you know, help them incorporate some of these ideas into their own teaching. They're not going to become PER people, but they can use some of the results of PER in their own teaching.
Yeah, it's like smaller scale version, action research we call it.
Right.
Okay, good. And then thinking about knowledge development, who do you network with? You've mentioned conferences, and where do you go to find your ideas for teaching?
Oh, well, I do go to physics education conferences. Like this summer, I'll go to the EduLearn conference, and then also to the World Conference on Physics Education, which is going to be in Krakow, Poland.
Oh, wow.
In August. And Karen Jo will come with me to that one. I mean, we're presenting the stuff from our quantum information science work with in the professional development model, the, you know, things like our students and teachers actually learning, because we do pre and post testing, and we look to see about content gains and things like that. And so we're going to be presenting those kinds of things. But going to those conferences allows me to network with those people. I know a lot of people in the European PER community, and so it's always good to talk with them and see what they're doing. And then also here in the U.S. American Association of Physics Teachers, their conferences.
So PER is physics education
research.
Okay, I thought so.
Yeah. So, yeah, I go to conferences, I read papers in the journals, and then there are occasional reports. Like there was a big report from the National Academies some years back on discipline-based education research. Even earlier, you know, well, now more than 20 years ago, the book How People Learn.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So that book is well known, but the chapter on expertise.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I know that one, yeah.
Yeah. The author of that is a physicist.
Oh, okay. I did not know, because when you were saying that, I've taught with CIRTL, CIRTL, and they have used that material for their college classroom class. So I made that connection when you were talking to that chapter.
Yeah.
That's
so,
great.
yeah, you'll find people in coming from the physics education research community
Okay.
in places you don't always expect.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
But yeah, I do what I do in the other science that I do, because I do treat physics education as a science. Now it's more than that. There is also the art of teaching, and you're dealing with people, with humans. So how you deal with them sends a message. So I'm always trying to be very solicitous of my students, and I always tell them, look, everybody can have bad days, and if you're having trouble with a homework assignment, everybody gets a freebie extension. And with exams, I give 3 exams a semester typically in my courses, the undergraduate courses, and one of them is, the lowest grade is dropped, but the final is always comprehensive. So I say, just because you drop that particular exam doesn't mean you're not responsible for the material, because that'll be 1/3 of the final. But everybody can have a bad day.
That's
so
true.
Understanding those kinds of things and trying to meet students where they are, especially at a place like UTA. We've got a very diverse student body, non-traditional student body, large number of Hispanic students. So that's part of the art of teaching.
Yeah.
But there's also a science of teaching. And so I approach the science of teaching the same way I approach space plasma physics.
Oh, wow.
I go to conferences, I read journals, I interact with my peers, my colleagues, bounce ideas off of them, write papers, write proposals, all that stuff.
Okay, that's awesome. We have one last kind of fun question. So looking back at your career, what is something you might say to your younger self?
Don't worry about it. It'll work out.
I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Lopez.
Thanks, Peggy.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to our conversation with Dr. Lopez about teaching and physics education. So we look forward to having you share our podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Pedagogy Next podcast. The podcast series is hosted by members of the Academy of Distinguished Teachers and supports dialogue surrounding teaching at UT Arlington. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon. The podcast has a companion blog with show notes and resources and can be found at websites.uta.edu/pedagogynext. Podcast hosts include Pete Smith, LaDonna Aiken, and myself, Peggy Symingson. Behind-the-scenes support comes from our thought partners and experts in OIT, including Lee Pierce, Howard Prince, Cyrus Haskell, and William Mercer. Dakota Jimenez in the Center for Distance Education is helping produce. Disclaimer, all views shared are the perspectives of individual faculty and do not reflect the views of UT Arlington or the Academy of Distinguished Teachers.